You don't look like you have this to spare. Those 7 words stopped Lucy Carter cold. She'd just pressed her last $10. Her last $10 into the hand of a man sitting on the ground in a torn coat shaking in the cold. Her brother needed that money for medicine. She knew it. She gave it anyway. And the stranger looked up at her with eyes that were sharp, calm, and completely in control, the eyes of a man who had never once been lost in his life. Lucy had no idea she just handed her future to the most dangerous man in the city. If this story moves something in you, subscribe right now, follow Lucy all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Nobody who gives has it to spare. That's the whole point. Lucy Carter said it before she even thought it. The words came out clean and certain, the way true things do, not rehearsed, not performed, just real. She stood up, pulled her coat tight against the cold, and walked away from the man on the steps without looking back. She had no idea he was watching her until she turned the corner. She had no idea he never stopped. The night had started like every other Tuesday night for the last 3 years. Lucy untied her apron at 9:15, said goodnight to Pete, and stepped out the back of the diner into the cold. 12 minutes home, she knew every crack in the sidewalk. She knew which corner smelled like burnt rubber and which lamppost flickered in the rain. She knew this walk the way you know something that has never once surprised you. But she was 6 minutes in when she saw him. He was sitting at the base of the steps outside the Harrington building, a man folded into himself, head down, hands pressed between his knees. No cup, no sign, no performance of need. Just a man who had run out of road. Lucy slowed. She told herself to keep walking. She had Ryan to check on soup going cold in a bag, and $4 left in her wallet after the 10, just 4 to stretch until Friday. She had no business stopping. Every rational part of her said keep moving. Then the man coughed, a deep tearing sound that came from somewhere past tired. Lucy stopped. She stood on the sidewalk and reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers found the folded bill immediately, the way your hand always finds the thing you've been protecting. She'd carried that 10 for 6 days. She'd told herself she was saving it for Ryan's Thursday blood panel copay. She'd moved it from her left pocket to her right pocket and back again, like she was still deciding. She crossed the sidewalk. She crouched down. She pressed the $10 into his hand. Here, she said, get something warm. He didn't move. She was about to stand up when he raised his head. She nearly stepped back. His eyes were dark and completely steady, not confused, not hollow, not the eyes she'd expected to find. They were the eyes of a man who was exactly where he intended to be. He looked at the bill in his hand. He looked at her face. His expression moved through something she couldn't read, landed somewhere between recognition and restraint. You don't look like you have this to spare, he said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that had given orders. Lucy held her ground. Nobody who gives has it to spare. That's the whole point. She stood up and walked away. It was the truest thing she'd said all week. It was also the sentence that would change everything. She got home at 9:32. Ryan's light was on under his door, which meant he was awake, which was either good or bad, depending on what he'd been doing. Lucy knocked twice. You eat, she called. Yeah. Properly silenced, Ryan. If the next word is crackers, I'm coming in. A pause. It was good crackers. Lucy almost smiled. She left the soup outside his door and went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened her wallet. $4. A crumpled receipt. Her bus pass. A photo of her and Ryan from 3 Christmases ago when their mother was still alive and everything had felt possible. She closed the wallet. She laid back and stared at the ceiling and thought about Thursday and the blood panel and the $1,100 the doctor had mentioned, like it was a minor inconvenience, and she did the math. The way you do when you know the answer is going to be wrong, slowly in, hoping the numbers will change if you carry them carefully enough. They didn't change. She fell asleep with the light on. Wednesday morning hit like a door. Lucy was behind the counter at 6:20. Coffee brewing sugar dispensers filled the first regulars trickling in with their newspaper habits and their particular seats. She liked the morning shift. People in the morning weren't demanding, they were just trying to get started, same as her. Mr. Albanese was on his second cup when the bell above the door rang at 8:05. Lucy was reaching for the carafe. She didn't look up right away. She poured the refill. She set the carafe down. She looked up. He was standing at the hostess stand in a charcoal coat that fit him the way expensive things fit, like it had been built specifically for his body. Clean-shaved. Composed. His hands were still at his sides, but his eyes were the same. Lucy's hand tightened slightly on the counter. She kept her face neutral and walked over. "Just one," she said. "Just one," he said. She led him to a corner table without letting herself think about it. He sat with his back against the wall, and his eyes on the room, a habit so practiced it looked natural. She handed him a menu. He didn't open it. "You walk home along Carver Street," he said. Not a question. Lucy set down the water glass with controlled precision. "Can I get you something, a coffee?" "Black." He looked up at her. "And I'd like to know why." "Why what, Ma? Why you gave away the last money in your wallet to someone you'd never seen?" Lucy looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. "I'll get your coffee." She walked away. Her pulse was moving faster than it should have been. Pete was cracking eggs at the grill when she pushed through the kitchen door. "Pete," she said, keeping her voice low. "Corner table, charcoal coat. Who is that?" Pete didn't look up immediately. He cracked the next egg, set down the shell. Then he turned to look through the pass-through window at the dining room, and Lucy watched something happen in his face, something fast, and shuddered like a window being closed from inside. "Why are you asking?" "Because he knew I walked home on Carver Street last night. He knew my wallet was empty." Pete turned back to the grill. His jaw was tight. "He say anything to you?" "He ordered coffee and asked why I gave money to a stranger. That's all." "Pete, who is he?" Pete flipped onto the eggs. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said without turning around, "I don't know his name, but the men who sit with their backs to walls in this part of the city." He stopped. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a 20, and held it out without looking at her. "If he leaves you anything on that table, you pocket it, and you say thank you, and you don't ask questions. You understand me?" "I don't need Lucy." He finally looked at her. His face was serious in a way she hadn't seen before. "Pocket it, no questions." She went back on the floor. She brought the man his coffee. She didn't linger. She served 4 other tables. She felt his eyes on her back twice and pretended she didn't. He stayed 40 minutes, drank 2 cups, left without a word. She cleared the table and found a folded $100 bill under the saucer. She stood there looking at it long enough that Carla, the other morning waitress, came up beside her and said, "You okay? You look like someone left you a note." "Just a tip," Lucy said. She folded the bill and put it in her apron pocket. Her hands weren't entirely steady. She told herself it was fine. A generous customer. Strange, yes. Unsettling, yes. But the city was full of strange men with too much money and complicated habits. She served them every week. This was not different. She told herself that for 4 hours. Then her phone rang at 2 o'clock. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Her thumb hovered. She picked up. Lucy Carter. The voice was young, professional, slightly rehearsed. "Who is this?" "My name isn't important. I'm calling on behalf of someone who believes he owes you something." "He doesn't. Nobody owes me anything." "That's exactly what he said you'd say." A pause. "He asked me to tell you nobody who gives has it to spare." Lucy walked to the far end of the break room. She put her back against the lockers. "What do you want?" "Just a conversation tonight. He'll send a car to..." "Oh, no. I don't get into cars sent by strangers." "He said you'd say that too." Another pause, this one longer. "Miss Carter, your brother's name is Ryan. He's 19 years old. He owes $46,000 to a man named Dario Ferris." The voice softened slightly. "Mr. Ferris gave him until Friday." The room tilted. Lucy gripped the phone with both hands now. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Say that number again." $46,000. The deadline is Friday at midnight. Miss Carter, that's 40 hours from right now. The microwave on the break room table hummed. Somewhere out on the floor, Carla laughed at something. The sounds of the diner continued in another world entirely just on the other side of a door. "He only wants to talk," the voice said. "The car will be at your buildings at 7:30. The line went dead. Lucy stood in the break room for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She counted them. It was something to do with her brain while the rest of her tried to recalibrate. $46,000. She called Ryan. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She typed, pick up. Right now. Not about anything you did. I just need to hear your voice. She stared at the screen. Nothing. She typed Ryan. Please. The three dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then I'm okay. I'll explain when you get home. Lucy read those 7 words 3 times. I'll explain. Not, I don't know what you're talking about. Not what's going on. Just, I'll explain. Which meant he knew, which meant he'd been carrying this $46,000. And he'd looked at her every morning at breakfast. And he'd let her worry about $4 and a bus pass and a blood panel copay. Her chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She walked back out onto the floor and she finished her shift. Because there was nothing else to do. Because her hands knew how to do this even when the rest of her was elsewhere. She refilled coffees, she smiled at table 7, she cashed out 2 checks and made change for a 20 and said, have a nice afternoon to a man she would not remember the face of 5 minutes later. At 4:30 she punched out. She went home. She changed her shirt. She sat on the couch with her phone face up on the cushion beside her and she watched the minutes move on the clock. At 6:50 she heard Ryan's key in the lock. He came in looking like a man walking towards something he'd been dreading for a long time. He was tall, her brother lean in the way of someone who forgot to eat when he was stressed. He had their mother's eyes and their father's stubborn jaw, and right now he couldn't look directly at her. Sit down, Lucy said. He sat. $46,000. Ryan's whole body reacted a flinch that started in his shoulders and ran down through his hands. He opened his mouth. Don't apologize yet, Lucy said. Just tell me the truth. All of it, from the beginning, he told her. It took 22 minutes, and by the end of it, Lucy knew more about the back room of a bar on Clement Street than she had ever wanted to know. It had started small, a few $100s, a lucky night, the particular madness of thinking you'd found a system. Then a bad run, then borrowing to cover the loss, then borrowing more. Then Dario Ferris, who wasn't just a man who ran a card game, but a man who ran everything connected to that card game, which connected to a great deal else. Why didn't you tell me? Lucy said when he finished. Ryan looked at the floor. Because you would have tried to fix it. Of course I would have tried. That's why, he said. He finally looked up. His eyes were red. Because you would have given up everything to fix something I broke and I couldn't. His voice cracked. I couldn't watch you do that again. Again, the words sat between them. Lucy looked at her brother for a long moment. She thought about their mother's hospital bills. She thought about the year she'd worked 3 jobs. She thought about every time she'd told him it was fine. It was handled, don't worry about it. Okay, she said quietly. I need you to trust me right now. Lucy, I need you to stay in this apartment tonight, not answer your phone unless it's me, and trust me. She stood up. She picked her coat off the chair. Can you do that? Where are you going? I'm handling it. Lucy, you can't just... Ryan. She looked at him. Can you trust me? A long silence, then quietly, yeah. Good. She walked out the door at 7:18. The car was already there when she came downstairs. Black, quiet engine running. The driver didn't speak. Lucy got in and watched her street disappear behind her. She told herself she was not afraid. She told herself she was making a calculated decision. She told herself the man in the charcoal coat had left $100 and done nothing else, had asked one question and accepted her answer when she walked away, had sent a car instead of coming himself, all of which suggested a man who understood the concept of choice. She told herself all of this. Her hands were cold for the entire ride. The restaurant was called Rossini's. She'd walked past it 100 times. Dark woods, soft gold light, the particular quiet of a place that never needed to advertise. The kind of place that was always full of the right people. She was shown to a table in the back without being asked her name. He was already there. Dark suit this time. No coat. His hands folded on the white tablecloth, a glass of red wine in front of him that he hadn't touched. He looked, she thought, like a man who had dressed carefully for something he wasn't certain about. He stood when she reached the table. Miss Carter, he said, thank you for coming. I almost didn't, she said and sat down. I know. He sat across from her. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her on those steps, direct, unguarded, no performance in it. I want to ask you something before we discuss your brother. Okay. When you gave me that money last night, did any part of you hesitate? Lucy looked at him. Yes. But you did it anyway. Yes. Why? She thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. Because I looked at you and I thought that man is cold. That man is alone. And I had something that could help even a little. She paused. I didn't think past that. Alexander Russo was quiet. He picked up his wine and for the first time he drank. I'm going to tell you who I am, he said, and I want you to sit with it before you respond. Can you do that? Tell me. My name is Alexander Russo. He set the glass down. I control a significant portion of the financial infrastructure of this city. Some of it is legal, some of it is not. Dario Ferris, the man your brother owes money to, works within a network that ultimately answers to me. He looked at her steadily. Your brother's debt can disappear tonight. One phone call, done. Lucy's heart was hammering. She kept her face still. And what does that cost me? That, he said, is the most honest question anyone has asked me in years. He leaned forward slightly. I don't have a simple answer. What I can tell you is this: I don't want your money. I don't want your compliance. I don't want anything from you that diminishes who you are. He paused. What I want is something I haven't had in a very long time. Lucy waited. Honesty, he said. Someone who talks to me like I'm a person and not a position. He looked almost embarrassed by the admission. That's what you gave me last night on those steps. Not $10, Miss Carter. You gave me 10 minutes of being treated like a man. The restaurant hummed softly around them. A waiter moved past, distant and discreet. You run a criminal organization, Lucy said carefully, and you want someone to talk to. I want someone in my orbit who hasn't been bought, he said, who isn't afraid of me for the wrong reasons, who will tell me the truth. He held her gaze. In exchange, your brother is safe. His debt is gone, and you have my protection for whatever that's worth to you. It's worth a great deal, Lucy said quietly, and that's exactly what worries me. He almost smiled. Smart. What happens if I say no? He leaned back. Your brother's situation is unchanged. I don't touch you. I don't touch him. I walk away, and we never speak again. He said it like he'd decided it long before tonight. I don't make deals through coercion, Miss Carter. You're here because you chose to get in that car. Lucy looked at this man, this careful, dangerous, oddly honest man, and she thought about Ryan sitting in their apartment, waiting for her to fix something. She thought about the years she'd spent trying to hold everything together with both hands and never once asking for help, because asking for help meant admitting it was more than she could carry. You sat on those cold steps last night, she said slowly, after making a decision you couldn't live with. What was it? A long silence. The kind that has weight. I ordered a man removed, he said quietly, a man who had worked for me for 11 years, because he made a mistake that cost me money, and because there were people watching to see if I would. He paused. I sat on those steps because I needed 5 minutes to be someone who hadn't just done that. And then I showed up. And then you showed up. His voice was very quiet. And you looked at me, not at what I represent, not at what you thought you saw, and you gave me the last thing you had. He picked up the wine again. His hand was not entirely steady. I have not been looked at like that in longer than I can tell you. Lucy sat with that. The candle between them flickered in a movement of air. I have conditions, she said finally. He looked up. Ryan stays out of it. Whatever this is, he never knows your name, never sets foot in anything connected to you, never owes you a single thing. He's free. Completely. Agreed. If you ever ask me to lie for you to cover something that harms someone innocent, I walk. No negotiation. Agreed. And if I walk, there are no consequences. Not for me, not for Ryan. You let us go. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Agreed. Then we can talk, Lucy said. I'm not saying yes to anything I don't fully understand, but I'm listening. Alexander Russo set down his wine. He looked at the woman across the table, this waitress with $4 in her wallet and a brother she'd been holding together with sheer will, and something in his expression settled like a long-standing tension finally releasing. Then I'll start from the beginning, he said, and the night quiet and irreversible moved forward. Alexander Russo talked for 40 minutes without once making it feel like a speech. He didn't explain himself the way powerful men usually do, with justifications layered over justifications with history arranged to make the present look inevitable. He just talked. He told her about his father, who had come to this country with $80 and a name nobody could pronounce, who had built a legitimate import business from nothing, and who had been robbed of it by a man with better lawyers and worse morals when Alexander was 23 years old. He told her about the choice he made the year after that, the alliance the first favor owed, the first favor collected, and the slow compounding way a man can walk so far into a particular world that by the time he looks back, the entrance has disappeared. Lucy listened without interrupting. She had learned a long time ago that the most honest version of a person comes out when you stop filling the silence for them. When he finished, the wine was gone, and the candle was lower, and the restaurant had emptied without either of them noticing. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd spent 40 minutes telling me why none of it was his fault." He looked at her. "It was my fault, most of it. The rest I chose the context that made it possible, which amounts to the same thing. That's more self-awareness than most people manage." "Self-awareness is easy," he said. "It's what you do with it that costs something." Lucy folded her hands on the table. "So what are you doing with it right now, tonight?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sitting across from a woman who told me the truth on a street corner and trusting that instinct enough to act on it." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it's not." He looked at her directly. "I'm trying to find out if there's any version of what I am that doesn't require me to leave every room feeling like something is wrong." Lucy didn't respond immediately. She turned that over the way you turn a stone looking for what was underneath. She had expected manipulation dressed as vulnerability. She had prepared for it. But something in the way he said it flat-tired without any apparent interest in whether it made him look good landed differently than she'd anticipated. "That's the most human thing you've said all night," she told him. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation." And just like that, she almost laughed. She stopped herself, which he noticed, and which made something in his expression shift slightly, not quite satisfaction. Relief, maybe. The particular relief of being almost normal for a moment. "Ryan's debt," she said, bringing it back. "When?" "I'll make the call on the way home." He reached into his jacket and produced a card. No name on it, just a number. "If anything changes between tonight and tomorrow morning, if anyone contacts him, if he feels followed, if anything feels wrong, that number reaches me directly." Lucy took the card. She looked at it for a moment, then put it in her coat pocket. "You said Ferris works within a structure you control. Does he know you're doing this?" "Not yet. When he finds out what happens, he accepts it," Alexander said simply. "That's the structure means. And if he doesn't accept it gracefully," a pause, "then we have a different conversation." Lucy understood what that meant without needing it explained, and she understood that understanding it without flinching was probably a test she'd just passed without meaning to. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. "I'll walk out of here," she said carefully, "and tomorrow morning my brother wakes up with $46,000 no longer hanging over his head, and your number is in my pocket, and I go to work and come home and make dinner. And then what? What does this look like on a Tuesday 3 weeks from now? I might call and ask if we can have coffee. Just coffee. Just coffee. In a conversation that isn't about business or favors or anything owed." He leaned back. "I have an entire city that does what I say, Miss Carter. What I don't have is a single person who will simply sit across from me and say something true. That's a lonely thing to admit." "Yes," he said. "It is." She stood up. He stood with her. She picked up her coat and he didn't move to help her with it, which she appreciated. Men who performed gestures like that were usually performing other things too. "Good night, Mr. Russo," she said. "Good night, Miss Carter." She walked out. The car was waiting. She got in and watched the restaurant recede through the window and told herself she had done something reasonable, something calculated, something survivable. She wasn't entirely sure any of that was true, but Ryan was going to wake up safe. That part she was sure of. She didn't sleep well. She lay in the dark and ran the evening through her head in pieces the way you do when you know you've done something irreversible and you need to understand it from every angle before you can file it somewhere that won't keep you up. Alexander Russo. The name sounded different now, not a rumor overheard in a kitchen, not a flicker of Pete's shuttered expression. A man in a suit who couldn't keep his wine glass still when he talked about the decision he had made the night before. At 2 in the morning, she got up and went to Ryan's room and knocked once. Yeah, he said immediately. He hadn't been sleeping either. She opened the door. He was sitting on the edge of his bed with his phone in both hands, looking at her like a man waiting for a verdict. It's handled, she said. He stared at her. What do you mean it's handled? I mean Dario Ferris will be told tomorrow morning that the debt is canceled. You won't hear from him again. Ryan's mouth opened, closed. Lucy, how did you? I handled it, she said again, and I need you to not ask me any questions about how, at least not tonight. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her the way he rarely did, the way that reminded her painfully of their mother. Are you okay? He said. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. She looked at her brother sitting there with his guilty eyes in his mother's face, and she felt something crack slightly in her chest, not break. Just crack a hairline fracture in the careful structure she'd been maintaining for years. I don't know yet, she said. But right now tonight, you're safe. That's enough. Ryan stood up and crossed the room and hugged her before she could step back, his arms around her shoulders, his chin over her head, the way he'd done since he'd gotten tall enough to do it. She stood stiff for a moment, then she let herself lean in. I'm sorry, he said into her hair. I'm so sorry, Lucy. I know. I'll fix it. I'll get a job. A real one. I'll pay back whatever you... Ryan. She pulled back. She looked at him. There's nothing to pay back, but I need you to promise me something. She waited until his eyes were on hers. You're done. Cards Ferris, all of it. Done. Not reduced, not scaled back. Gone. Do you understand? Yes. I need it to be real. It's real. His voice was steadier than she expected. I swear to you, I'm done. She looked at him for another moment, weighing it. Then she nodded. Get some sleep. She went back to her room and laid down, and this time she slept. Thursday morning, the diner was busier than usual. A water main had broken 2 blocks over, which rerouted foot traffic past their door and filled every table by 7:30. Lucy worked the floor at a pace that left no room for thinking, which was exactly what she needed. Refill order, clear reset. The rhythm of it was an old friend. She was on her 4th table of the morning when her apron pocket buzzed. Unknown number. Different from yesterday's. She stepped into the back hallway and picked up. Hello. Lucy Carter. The voice was older, rougher. Not professional the way yesterday's had been. This was the real thing, the voice of a man who had never needed to learn how to sound like anything other than what he was. You don't know me. Then why are you calling? Because last night Alexander Russo canceled a $46,000 debt. Mine. A pause. I like to know why. Lucy's hand was very steady on the phone. She was proud of that. I think you have the wrong number. I don't. The voice was almost amused. You're the waitress from the diner on Marchetti Street. You walked home Tuesday night on Carver Street. You gave something to someone you shouldn't have. Another pause, heavier this time. I just want to understand what you are to him. I'm nobody, Lucy said. People who are nobody don't move Alexander Russo to cancel $46,000 before breakfast. His voice dropped slightly. So let me ask you clearly. Are you with him? I'm hanging up now. Miss Carter. She hung up. She stood in the hallway for 10 seconds. Then she put her phone back in her pocket and walked back out on the floor and refilled Table 9's coffee without spilling a drop. But her mind was moving fast. Dario Ferris. It had to be. The man who just found out his debt had evaporated, who wanted to know why, who had gotten her number from somewhere in the space of a single night, which meant he had resources, which meant he had already pulled on the thread. She called the number on Alexander's card at her lunch break. He picked up on the second ring. Miss Carter. Dario Ferris called me this morning. He has my number. A very brief silence. What did he say? He wanted to know what I am to you. What did you tell him? Nothing, I hung up. She kept her voice low. Is this going to be a problem? I'll take care of it. That's what you said about the debt. And the debt was handled before 9 o'clock this morning. His voice was calm, measured, not dismissive, taking her seriously in the way of a man who was already 3 steps ahead and didn't want to alarm her with the details. Dario is testing a boundary. He does that. I'll clarify the boundary. How? In the way things like this are clarified. Alexander. She said his name and it felt strange in her mouth, too familiar and not familiar enough at the same time. I need to understand what I'm in the middle of. Not the full picture. Just how worried should I be right now on a scale of 1 to 10? A pause. She could hear him thinking. 3, he said finally. Maybe 4. Nothing I can't manage. And tomorrow, 2, he said. I promise, Uguam. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why which bothered her more than the call from Ferris. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. And then, are you all right? The question was so ordinary, so unexpectedly normal, that it caught her sideways for a moment. Yes, she said. You're lying a little. A little, she admitted. I'll be fine. I know you will, he said. That was clear from the first night. He ended the call. Lucy sat in the break room with her sandwich untouched for 2 minutes. She was thinking about the way Dario Ferris's voice had sounded, not angry, not threatening. Curious. The curiosity of a man who had spotted something unexpected on the board and was trying to decide what it meant before anyone told him to stop looking. That she knew from some deep instinct she hadn't known she had was more dangerous than anger. The second call came at 4:15. Same number. She let it ring. The third came at 4:40. She let that one ring too. The fourth came from a different number at 5:02. She was standing in the alley outside the diner getting air, and she answered it because she had a feeling. You keep hanging up, Dario Ferris said. I keep not wanting to talk to you. That's fair. He sounded almost cheerful about it. Let me be direct, Miss Carter. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because in 22 years of working with Alexander Russo, I have never seen him cancel a debt for personal reasons. Not once, not for anyone. A pause. That makes you interesting. I'm not interesting, Lucy said. I'm his waitress. You're the reason $46,000 disappeared overnight. His voice shifted slightly, still controlled, but with something new in it, an edge that hadn't been there before. I had plans for that debt, Miss Carter. It wasn't just money. It was leverage against someone else, through your brother. He paused. Alexander has removed a piece from my board. I'd like to know why. Lucy's throat was very dry. What do you want? Just a conversation, face to face, no cars, no restaurant, somewhere public. You choose. No. Miss Carter. I said no. She kept her voice flat. If you have something to say to Alexander Russo, say it to him. I'm saying it to you because you're the variable, Ferris said, and variables need to understand their position. Another pause, and this one had the quality of a door opening slightly. He will use you. Men like Alexander don't take on kindness as a hobby. There's a reason you're useful to him. I'm trying to help you see it before you're too far in to see anything else. Lucy said nothing. Just something to think about, Ferris said pleasantly. Have a good evening. She stood in the alley after the call ended and stared at the brick wall across from her and felt the distinct, disorienting sensation of a world that had reordered itself without asking permission. There's a reason you're useful to him. She thought about Alexander's hands on the tablecloth, the wine he'd barely drunk, the way he'd said self-awareness is easy, like a man who'd had the same argument with himself many times in the dark. She thought about the way he'd asked if she was all right, like it was a genuine question rather than a social formula. She thought either this man is exactly what he appears to be, which is complicated and lonely and operating by a code she doesn't fully understand yet, or he is the most sophisticated thing she has ever walked into, and the kindness was the door. She didn't know. She genuinely did not know. And the not knowing had a particular quality to it, not paralyzing, not clean, just present. Like a splinter you can feel but can't quite reach. She texted Alexander Ferris called again. He knows you removed leverage, not just debt. He thinks I'm a variable, his word. She paused, then added, I think he's right. I want to talk tomorrow. The reply came in under a minute. Yes. Where? She thought about it. The diner, 7 a.m. Before I start my shift, I'll be there. She put her phone away. She went back inside. She finished the last 90 minutes of her shift, and she cleaned her station and said goodnight to Pete, who looked at her with those careful, shuttered eyes and didn't ask any questions she wasn't ready to answer. On the way home, she stopped at the pharmacy. She'd been paid today and the copay was $40, and she had enough now. And Ryan's blowout panel was tomorrow, and some things at least were still as simple as they had always been. She stood at the counter and handed over her insurance card and thought, this is still my life. Pharmacy counters and bus passes and leftover soup. This is still who I am. She paid. She tucked the prescription into her bag. She walked home in the dark, 12 minutes, every crack in the sidewalk, exactly where she'd left it. Ryan was waiting up. He was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea already made, and that alone, that small, quiet act of preparation, told her something had shifted in him. He'd been thinking all day the same way she'd been thinking, processing, rearranging. I got a call today, he said before she could sit down. Ferris, he told me the debt was gone. He was, Ryan hesitated. He was too calm about it. You know, like when something's going to happen and the person knows it, but you don't. Lucy sat down and wrapped both hands around her mug. What did he say exactly? He said the debt was settled on my behalf by a third party. He said to tell you, Ryan stopped. Lucy looked up. What? He said to tell you the favor is noted. Ryan's eyes were worried. Lucy, what did you do? Who did you talk to? She looked at her brother across the kitchen table. She looked at his young, worried, familiar face, the face she'd been protecting her whole adult life without ever thinking of it as protection, just as love, just as what you do. The favor is noted. Ferris saying that wasn't courtesy. It was a declaration. He was telling Alexander that he was watching, keeping score, that whatever Alexander had taken from him, he was filing it away until the moment to use it arrived. She was not a variable. She was a message. Ryan, she said quietly, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She set her mug down. The next few weeks, if anyone you don't know approaches, you calls you, tries to talk to you about me or about any of this, Lucy, you come to me immediately before you say a word to anyone else. Do you understand? Ryan stared at her. You're scaring me. Good, she said, because I need you paying attention. She picked up her tea again. Her hands were calm. Her voice was calm. Inside, something had gone very quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of a person who has just understood the shape of the thing they're standing in and decided to stand in it anyway. Are you in trouble? Ryan asked. Not yet, she said, but possibly. Possibly. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was set. Then I want to help. The best thing you can do for me right now is exactly what you promised last night. Stay clean. Stay out of it. Stay safe. She looked at him steadily. That's not nothing, Ryan. That's everything. He picked up his mug. He nodded slowly. Okay. They drank their tea in silence. The apartment was quiet around them. Outside, the city moved and breathed the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, alive, with all its arrangements and counter-arrangements, its favors and its debts, and its long, patient scores being settled by people with far more patience than conscience. Lucy rinsed her mug and went to bed. She set her alarm for 5:30. She had a meeting at 7, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not walking into a room with less than the other person. She had something he needed. Alexander Russo had told her as much in the careful, honest way he had of saying things. She had something Dario Ferris had decided was worth 3 phone calls in a single day. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she was going to. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would sit across from Alexander Russo in the diner where she'd spent 3 years of her life filling coffee cups, and she would ask him the questions she should have asked at Rossini's, the questions she'd been too careful and too grateful to ask over white tablecloths and candlelight. She would ask, why me really? She would ask, what does Ferris know that I don't? She would ask, what did you decide on those steps and what does it have to do with me being in this room? And she would watch his eyes when he answered. Because eyes, she had learned, were the one thing even the most controlled people couldn't manage every single second. Sleep came slowly, but it came. Alexander Russo was already at the corner table when Lucy arrived at 6:58. Not the corner table she usually put customers in, the one by the window that caught the morning light and made everything look warmer than it was. He'd chosen the other corner, the one with the wall on two sides and a clear line of sight to both the front door and the kitchen. He had a coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched, and he was watching the door with the particular patience of a man who had spent his life being the one people came to, not the one who waited. Lucy hung up her coat, tied her apron, and walked over with the carafe. "You're early," she said. "You said 7. He watched her pour. "I'm always early." "Control thing." He looked up at her. "Probably." She sat down across from him. Pete was in the kitchen, and Carla wasn't in yet, and the diner was empty except for one man at the counter reading a newspaper, who was almost certainly not just reading a newspaper. Lucy had noticed him the moment she walked in, young, still facing the wrong direction for someone who just wanted breakfast. "Is he yours?" she said, tilting her head slightly toward the counter. Alexander didn't look. "Yes." "Does he have to be here today?" "Yes." "Why today specifically?" He picked up his coffee, finally drank. "Because Dario Ferris spent last night making calls. Because by this morning, at least 4 people in this city know your name who didn't know it on Tuesday." He set the cup down. "So yes, today he has to be here." Lucy absorbed that. She kept her face steady and her hands flat on the table. 4 people, at least. And how dangerous are these 4 people? On their own manageable. He looked at her directly. "Together if Dario decides to make something of this more complicated. You told me a 3, maybe a 4. That was yesterday morning." Something moved in his jaw. "Dario moves faster than I anticipated. I'm adjusting." "So the number went up." "The number went up," he confirmed. He said it without apology, without the particular smoothness of a man trying to manage her reaction. He just said it the way you say a fact that's inconvenient but still true. Lucy looked at him for a moment. "I appreciate that you didn't try to minimize it. I told you I'd be honest with you. You also told me you'd manage Ferris. I am managing him. Managing doesn't mean eliminating in the first 24 hours. A pause. "Not in this case." "Why not in this case?" He was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle. "Because Dario and I have 22 years of history, and you don't break something like that without consequences that ripple outward in ways that could be significantly worse for you than what's happening now." He looked up. "I'm not protecting Dario. I'm protecting the situation." There's a difference. Lucy thought about what Ferris had said on the phone. The favor is noted. She thought about the word leverage. She thought about the fact that Ryan's debt hadn't just been money. It had been a mechanism, a way of reaching through Ryan to apply pressure to something or someone she still didn't fully understand. Ryan wasn't the target, she said. It came out as a statement, not a question, because she'd been lying awake understanding it since 2 in the morning. Alexander's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, something more like acknowledgement. "No." "Then who was—" A longer pause. He set the cup down and looked at her with the steady eyes she'd seen first on those cold steps and had been trying to read ever since. "Me." The word landed in the quiet diner like something dropped from a height. "Dario was accumulating leverage against you," Lucy said slowly. "Through Ryan, through me, before he even knew I existed. Ryan's debt was purchased from the original creditor 8 weeks ago," Alexander said. "Oh, Dario bought it quietly. He was building a chain, your brother, then you, then a pressure point he could use when he needed it." He watched her face. "He didn't know you'd come to me first. That was not part of his plan." "When did you find out?" Last night after I got home from Rossini's." His voice was even. "I made the call to cancel Ryan's debt and started pulling the thread and realized what I was looking at. So I wasn't a coincidence," Lucy said. "Sitting down next to you on those steps was a coincidence," he said. "Everything before that moment was Dario's arrangement. What happened on those steps, that was just you." He held her gaze. "And that is the one part of this that Dario did not engineer and cannot account for." Lucy sat with that for a moment. The sounds of the diner moved around her. Pete's radio in the kitchen, the hiss of the coffee machine, the faint traffic outside. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the soundtrack of the life she'd had 4 days ago when she was just a woman with $4 and a 12-minute walk home. "He was going to use my brother to get to you," she said. "Yes. And now you're using that to—" She stopped. "To what?" Alexander said quietly. I don't know yet, Lucy said. That's what I'm trying to figure out. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not using you, Lucy. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and they both noticed it. He didn't walk it back. I told you at Rossini's I want someone honest. That's still the whole of it. But my being here is also inconvenient for Dario. Yes. So it serves a purpose for you strategically whether you intend it to or not. He looked at her for a long moment. You're right, he said. I won't insult you by denying the geometry of it. He paused. But the geometry isn't why I'm sitting in this diner at 6:58 in the morning. Then why are you? He looked at the table, then back at her. Because you were the first thing in a long time that felt real, he said. And then, as if the admission embarrassed him slightly, that's the entire answer. I know how it sounds. Lucy looked at this man, dangerous, precise, with a man at the counter who definitely had a gun under his jacket, and thought about the fact that she believed him. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough. The partial belief of a practical woman who had learned to work with incomplete information. Okay, she said, then tell me the rest of it, all of it, starting with what Dario actually wants from you and ending with where I actually stand. And Alexander Russo, for the second time in 2 days, told her the truth. The full picture was worse than the partial picture which she'd expected. It was also more coherent, which helped. Dario Ferris had been Alexander's second-in-command for 22 years. He ran the Eastern Distribution Network money, mostly the particular movement of it, through channels that required a certain kind of creative accounting. For 2 decades, this had worked because Alexander trusted Dario, and Dario understood his position. But 3 months ago, something had shifted. Dario had begun moving money in ways that didn't trace back through the usual channels. Small amounts at first, amounts that could be explained, absorbed, overlooked. Then larger. Then 6 weeks ago, Alexander had found a discrepancy that couldn't be explained by accident. Dario was building something parallel, his own structure inside Alexander's, financed by funds that didn't belong to him. You confronted him, Lucy asked. Not yet. She stared at him. Why not? Because confronting him means choosing what comes after, and what comes after has to be chosen carefully, or it becomes very messy for a large number of people. He said it without any particular emotion, which was somehow more chilling than if he'd said it with anger. Dario knows I know. I know he knows I know. We're in the part of the conversation that happens before the conversation. And Ryan was going to be his insurance policy. A piece of it. He was collecting leverage from multiple directions. Your brother was one thread. Alexander paused. You want to know what the most troubling part of it is? Tell me. Dario is not a reckless man. He's been patient about this for months, which means he believes he has enough or will have enough soon to make a move. He looked at her. And when he called you yesterday 4 times, that was not patience. That was a man who discovered an unexpected variable and reacted. Me. You. Lucy leaned back. She pressed her palms flat on the table and thought. So my being connected to you, whatever that even means, disrupts something in his timeline. It complicates his read of the board, yes. Alexander was watching her process it. He doesn't know what you are to me. He doesn't know your boundaries or your access or what I've told you. That uncertainty is disruptive for him. So I'm not just a variable, Lucy said slowly. I'm an unpredictable one. Yes. And unpredictable variables in your world are either assets or threats, Alexander said. No middle ground. Which one am I to Dario, Sue? A beat. Right now he hasn't decided. And how long until he decides? That, Alexander said, is what I'm trying to determine before he does. The man at the counter turned a page of his newspaper. The coffee machine hissed. Carla came through the front door at 7:12, stamping cold off her feet, and gave Lucy a curious look. Who's the suit? That Lucy answered with a slight shake of her head that meant not now. She waited until Carla disappeared into the back. What do you need from me? She said. Practically. Specifically. I need you to continue doing exactly what you're doing, Alexander said. Going to work, coming home, being visible and calm and unremarkable. He paused. If Dario or anyone connected to him makes contact again, you tell me immediately. You don't engage, you don't negotiate, you don't try to handle it yourself. And if they approach Ryan, same, immediately. And in exchange, you and your brother are protected, fully, for as long as this takes. He paused. And I keep being honest with you about all of it. Lucy looked at him. There's something else, she said. I can feel it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the man I had removed Monday night. He said it carefully. His name was Theo Carver. He worked logistics for me for 8 years. He made a mistake, a financial mistake that cost a significant amount of money. He paused. I found out last night that the mistake wasn't entirely his own. Lucy went still. Meaning what? Meaning Dario set him up, gave him information that led him to make the decision he made knowing I'd find out, knowing what I'd do. He looked at the table. I removed a man who was partly a victim of the same operation I'm now trying to dismantle. The words sat in the air. Can you fix it? Lucy asked. Not entirely. Can you fix it partially? I'm trying to. He finally looked up. I'm telling you this because you asked me on those steps what decision I'd made that I couldn't live with. Now you know the whole of it. Lucy thought about the man on the steps, the Harrington building, a torn coat and those inexplicably steady eyes. She thought about handing over a $10 bill that she'd carried for 6 days and couldn't really spare, and how she'd done it because it had felt in that moment like the only thing that was true. She thought, I am in this now. Whatever this is, I am in it. Okay, she said. She stood up and picked up the carafe and topped off his coffee because her shift had technically started and Pete would notice if she just sat around. I'll do what you're asking, but I have a condition to add. What is it? Theo Carver, she said. Whatever you can do for him, you do it. Not for me, not as a transaction, just because it's the right thing. Alexander looked up at her. For a moment, his face did something complicated, something that moved through discomfort and landed unexpectedly somewhere that looked like gratitude. Agreed, he said quietly. Good. She straightened up. Now drink your coffee. It's good coffee. For the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. It was a small thing, almost rusty like a door that hadn't been opened in a while. But it was real. She went back to work. The day moved. Orders came in, tables filled and emptied. The lunch rush arrived at its usual overwhelming speed, and Lucy worked through it the way she always did, steadily, efficiently, keeping the rhythm. She didn't think about Alexander Russo or Dario Ferris between 11 and 1 because she couldn't afford to. 14 tables don't run themselves. It was at 1:45 when the rush had thinned and she was resetting table 4 that Pete appeared at her elbow. Someone's been asking about you, he said quietly. She didn't look up. She straightened the salt shaker. Who? Don't know him. Young guy, mid-20s. Came in around noon, ordered coffee. Asked Carla if Lucy Carter still worked here. Said he was an old friend. Pete paused. Carla told him yes before I could stop her. Lucy set down the pepper shaker. What did he look like? Clean cut, nice jacket, looked like money but trying not to. Pete's voice was low and very even. He left when he saw me come out. Lucy untied her apron and retied it. Her hands were steady. Thanks, Pete. Lucy, he caught her arm. Not hard, just enough to make her stop. I don't know what's going on. I don't want to know. But I've worked in this neighborhood for 31 years and I know what certain kinds of attention look like. He looked at her directly. You need to be careful. I know. Not careful like checking your phone careful. Careful like... He stopped. He let go of her arm. Just careful. I hear you, Pete. She went to the break room and texted Alexander. Someone asking about me at work. Young, well-dressed. Left when Pete came out. The reply came in 40 seconds. Don't leave work alone today. I'll have someone outside at your shift end. She typed, I don't want visible security following me around. His reply, not visible. You won't see them, but they'll be there. She stood there looking at the message and feeling the strange vertigo of a life that had become in 4 days something she wouldn't have recognized from the outside. Then she put her phone away and walked back out on the floor because she had 3 tables waiting. She almost made it through the rest of the day without incident. At 4:20, she was cashing out a table near the window when she saw him. Not the man Pete had described, someone different, older. standing across the street in a brown jacket, not looking at the diner, not looking at anything in particular, in the way that people do when they are specifically trying not to look like they're watching something. Lucy carried the check back to the register without changing her pace or her expression. She was still standing at the register when her phone buzzed. Alexander again, but this time not a text, a call. She stepped into the hallway. "I see him," she said quietly. "Which one?" "Brown jacket, across the street." "I know, don't react. He's watching for a reaction." His voice was very calm. "Go back on the floor. Finish your shit. Don't go near the window." "Alexander, Lucy, I need you to trust me for the next 3 hours." She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, opened them. "Okay. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it," she said. "Is this Dario?" "One of his people, yes." "He's having me watched." "He's establishing your routine," Alexander said. "It's a first step, not an action. He's still in the information phase." "How long does the information phase last?" A pause. "Typically a few days." "And after the information phase?" "That depends on what I do in the meantime." His voice sharpened slightly, "Which is why I need you calm and visible and exactly who you are. You're not a target, Lucy. You're a question he is trying to answer. Don't give him the answer." She pressed the back of her head against the wall, stared at the ceiling. "Okay. 3 hours." 3 hours, she repeated. She ended the call. She walked back out on the floor. She smiled at table 7. She poured coffee at table 9. She was aware with a new and uncomfortable precision of exactly where the front window was at all times. And she stayed away from it without making it look like she was staying away from it. At 4:45, Carla said, "You seem off today. Everything okay?" "Long week," Lucy said. "It's Thursday." "Long week," she said again, and Carla laughed and left her alone. At 5:30, she punched out. She put on her coat. She pushed through the back door, not the front, she decided without making a decision about it, just her feet taking her toward the back, and walked out into the alley. A man fell into step beside her. She nearly stopped walking. She caught herself. He was maybe 40 compact, wearing a gray jacket. He didn't look at her. He walked at the same pace 2 feet away, with the practiced casualness of someone who had done this many times. "Mr. Russo sent me," he said quietly. "Don't acknowledge me. Just keep walking. I'll stay back after the first corner." A pause. "There were 2 of them tonight, not one. The second one picked you up at the back door. He's behind us. Don't look." Lucy kept walking. Her heart was hitting hard against her ribs. "He's gone," the man said 30 seconds later. "Turned off at Carver. He has what he needed." Another pause. "You're clear the rest of the way home." She almost asked how he knew. She didn't. She just kept walking. At the corner of her street, the man in the gray jacket stopped. She kept going. She didn't look back. She climbed the stairs to her apartment. She unlocked her door. She went inside and stood in the middle of her kitchen for a full minute without moving, just breathing, just locating herself in the ordinary details of her own space. The plants on the windowsill that she kept forgetting to water. The photograph of her and Ryan. The stack of mail she hadn't dealt with yet. Then she sat down and called Alexander. "They followed me from the back door," she said. "I know. Marcus saw the second one when you came out." "They were at the back door, Alexander. That means they knew I'd use the back." She paused, "Which means someone told them. Or they've been watching longer than today." A silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly. The control was still there, but something underneath it had tightened. "How long have you been using the back door?" "I don't always. I went out the back today specifically to avoid the one Pete saw across the street." "So they didn't know. They covered both exits." "Which means they're thorough." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you inside?" "Yes." "Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone you don't know. I'll call you in an hour." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to have a conversation I should have had 3 months ago," he said. And the flatness of it, the absolute stillness in his voice, was the most frightening thing she'd heard in 4 days of frightening things. "Alexander." She stopped him before he could hang up. "Don't do anything that can't be undone." A pause. "Define can't be undone." "You know what I mean." Another pause. Longer. I hear you, he said finally. That's not the same as agreeing. No, he said. It's not. He paused again. But I hear you, Lucy. That matters more than you know right now. He ended the call. Lucy set her phone on the counter. She went and knocked on Ryan's door. He opened it immediately. He'd been listening for her, she could tell. His eyes went to her face and he read something there because he said, "What happened?" before she could speak. "Nothing yet," she said. "Come sit with me." They sat on the couch the way they used to when they were kids, and their mother worked late, and the apartment felt too big. And the solution was to just be in the same space, sharing the same silence. Ryan turned the television on low. Just noise, just something to fill the edges, and Lucy pulled her knees up and leaned her head back and thought about Alexander Russo making phone calls in some rooms she'd never seen. Having a conversation she'd never hear on her behalf, on Ryan's behalf, pulling at threads she couldn't see from where she was standing. She thought about Dario Ferris and his voice on the phone. "I just want to understand what you are to him." 4 days ago, she'd had a simple answer to that. Now she didn't have a simple answer to anything. What she did have, she realized, was a choice. Not the choice of whether to be in this she was already in. It had been in it since Tuesday night, maybe longer, if Dario's arrangement dated back 8 weeks. But the choice of what kind of person she was going to be inside it. Whether she was going to be the thing that happened to Lucy Carter, or whether she was going to be Lucy Carter happening to it. The distinction felt small. She suspected it wasn't. Her phone buzzed, a text from Alexander. "A conversation with Dario is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I want you to know before it happens. It may change things quickly." She typed back, "How quickly?" His reply, "By tomorrow afternoon, this is either resolved or significantly escalated." She stared at the screen, typed, "Which do you think it'll be?" A long pause, longer than any of his other pauses. "Then honestly, I don't know. He's not behaving like the man I've known for 22 years, and that means I can't fully predict him." Lucy read that twice, then she typed, "Is there anything I can do?" His reply came faster this time, and it was different from all the others, shorter, simpler, with none of the careful control she'd come to expect from him. He typed, "You already did it. Tuesday night, everything since then is just consequence." Lucy looked at that message for a long time. She thought about $10. She thought about a man on cold steps in the way she crouched down without thinking, the way the decision had arrived already made, the way true choices always seem to come, not through deliberation, but through something older and more stubborn than deliberation. Nobody who gives has it to spare. That's the whole point. She'd meant it when she said it. She still meant it. She just hadn't known, standing up from those steps and walking away into the cold, that she'd set something in motion that would still be moving when she went to bed 4 days later, and still be moving when she woke up. She put her phone face down on her knee. On the television, a weather report moved through its maps and numbers, indifferent and steady. Ryan leaned his shoulder against hers, and Lucy Carter, who had spent her whole life holding things together with both hands, sat very still and let tomorrow come. Lucy didn't sleep past 4:30. She lay there for 20 minutes trying to convince herself that another hour was possible, then gave up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter in the dark, listening to the building breathe around her. Pipes, someone's television 2 floors up, the particular silence of a city that hadn't quite started yet. She thought about Alexander's last message. Everything since then is just consequence. She turned that sentence over in her head for most of the night, holding it up against the light, trying to determine if it was comfort or warning. She still couldn't decide. Maybe it was both. Maybe in his world, things didn't sort cleanly into categories like that. Ryan's door was closed. She could hear him sleeping, the slight, irregular rhythm of it, the breath of a 19-year-old who'd spent the last 8 weeks terrified and was finally, for the first time in months, not waking up at 3 in the morning, convinced his phone was about to ring with something catastrophic. She stood outside his door for a moment and listened to that sound and let it be enough. Then she got dressed, poured her coffee into a travel cup, and waited for whatever Friday was going to bring. Alexander called at 7:15. "The meeting with Dario is at 9, he said. No greeting. They'd moved past greetings somewhere in the last 4 days without either of them noting the moment. "I want you to know how it was arranged. Tell me." "I called him last night. I told him we needed to talk about the discrepancy I'd found 3 months ago." A pause. I didn't mention you. Why not? Because I want to see if he brings you up himself. What he volunteers tells me where his head is. Another pause. If he's decided you're a threat, he'll use you as a bargaining chip in the conversation, offer something in exchange for your removal from the situation. Lucy set her coffee down. And if he does that, then I know exactly where we stand. His voice was flat and certain. And the conversation ends differently than he's planning. What does ends differently mean? It means the 22 years end, Alexander said. Formally, with consequences. Lucy was quiet for a moment. She thought about what she'd said last night, don't do anything that can't be undone, and the way he'd said, I hear you, in a voice that meant he heard her but hadn't promised anything. Are you ready for that? She asked. If it comes to it, a silence that told her more than an answer would have. I've been getting ready for it for 3 months, he said finally. I've been hoping not to need it. Hope isn't a strategy. He almost laughed. Almost. No, it's not. Another pause. How are you? I'm fine. Lucy. I've been awake since 4:30, and I'm standing in my kitchen, and somewhere out there, a man I've never met is deciding whether I'm useful or dangerous to him, so. She picked up her coffee. I'm fine. Oh, and that's actually a fairly accurate definition of fine, Alexander said. I thought so. Stay home today if you can. I can't. I have the morning shift. Then the same arrangement as yesterday. Marcus will be outside. The man in the gray jacket. Yes. Tell him I know he's there. It was unnerving yesterday not knowing if the person walking beside me was yours or theirs. I'll tell him. A brief pause. Lucy, whatever happens today, I want you to know that your brother's safety is not contingent on the outcome of this meeting. That's already done. That doesn't change regardless of what Dario does or says. She hadn't known she needed to hear that until she heard it. Something in her chest released slightly. Thank you. I'll call you when it's over. He ended the call. Lucy stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, then picked up her coat and went to work. The morning shift moved the way mornings do when you need time to pass slowly with great attention to ordinary things. Lucy took orders and poured coffee and smiled at Mr. Albanese and refilled the sugar dispensers and kept her phone face up on the counter in her peripheral vision the entire time. At 8:47, a text from Alexander. Walking in now. She stared at it for a moment. Then she tucked the phone in her apron pocket and went to table 6. At 9:38, nothing. At 10:02, nothing. At 10:19, Pete came up behind her at the counter and said very quietly, There's a woman outside. She's been standing there for 20 minutes. Lucy didn't turn around. What does she look like? 40 maybe? Dark coat. She's not window shopping. Pete paused. She's watching the door. Not a man this time. They changed the approach. Lucy noted this the way you note a shift in the weather with the kind of calm dread that doesn't help anything but can't be avoided. Okay, she said. Okay, that's all you've Pete, she turned and looked at him. His face was tight with a worry he'd been carrying since Wednesday and hadn't known how to put down. I'm handling it. You keep saying that. And it keeps being true, she said. She touched his arm briefly. Trust me. He didn't look convinced, but he went back to the kitchen. She texted Alexander woman in dark coat outside diner, watching the front door. This is new. 3 minutes passed. Then his reply, I know. The meeting didn't go as planned and don't go near the front. I'm coming to you. Lucy read that twice. Didn't go as planned. 4 words with a huge amount of space inside them. She typed, What happened? His reply. Tell you when I get there, 20 minutes. She put the phone away. She went to table 4, cleared it, reset it, wiped it down with the particular thoroughness of someone who needs their hands occupied. She was aware of the front window in the way you're aware of a sound you can't quite locate, not looking at it, just knowing it was there, knowing there was a woman outside who had been sent to stand there for a reason she didn't fully understand yet. Carla sidled up beside her. That lady has been outside for half an hour. Should I call someone? No, Lucy said. She's not going to come in. Carla looked at her. How do you know? Because if she was going to come in, she already would have. Lucy picked up the dish tray. She's just watching. That's creepy. Yes, Lucy said and carried the tray to the back. Alexander walked through the door at 10:41, and Lucy had his coffee on the table before he'd finished sitting down. She slid in across from him and looked at his face and read it the way she'd learned to read it over 4 days, the tight set of his jaw, the controlled stillness that meant he was managing something large. "Tell me," she said. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Dario came in with a lawyer." Lucy went still. "His own lawyer. Not his usual one. Someone I didn't know." Alexander's voice was even, but his knuckles were white against the cup, which means he'd been preparing for this meeting before I called him to arrange it. "He knew you were going to call. He was waiting for it." He looked up at her. "We've been reading the same board, Lucy. He just had a longer head start." "What did the lawyer say?" "Nothing at first. Dario did the talking. He acknowledged the discrepancy, didn't apologize, didn't explain it, just acknowledged it like it was a minor accounting difference he'd been meaning to bring up." Alexander paused. "Then he said he had concerns about my recent decision-making, specifically my decision to involve an outside party in internal business." "Me?" Lucy said. "You." His jaw tightened. "He said that bringing a civilian into contact with our operations created liability. He used that word, liability. He said he had documentation of your involvement and that he felt obligated for the protection of the organization to ensure that documentation was handled appropriately." Lucy felt the specific cold of a threat dressed as a procedural concern. "He's saying he'll expose me. He's saying he has something that could expose you. Whether it's real or manufactured, I don't know yet." Alexander finally drank from the cup. "He's offering to make it disappear in exchange for two things. First, I acknowledge his parallel structure as a legitimate secondary operation, essentially a partition. He runs his side, I run mine. And second," Alexander looked at her directly, "you're gone from this, from my life, complete separation. He wants a guarantee that you have no ongoing access to me or to anything connected to me." The diner hummed around them. Lucy heard Carla taking an order at table 2. She heard Pete's radio. All of it very ordinary, very indifferent to the shape of what was happening at this corner table. "What did you say?" she asked. "I said no." To both. She looked at him. "Alexander, no." His voice was quiet but absolute. "I'm not partitioning my organization for a man who spent 6 months stealing from me and then built a case out of manufactured documents. And I am not agreeing to—" He stopped. He set the cup down. "He put your name on a table as a bargaining chip. I don't negotiate with people who do that. Even when not negotiating costs you significantly more." "Even then." He looked at her with that steady, infuriating directness. "Is that frustrating to you?" "It's terrifying to me," she said honestly, "because it means whatever happens next is bigger than it would have been if you'd taken the deal." "Yes." "And it happens faster." "Yes, because he's going to take your no as a declaration." "He already has." Alexander reached into his jacket and produced a folded paper and slid it across the table. "He handed me this as I left." Lucy unfolded it. It was a single printed page, a photograph slightly grainy of Lucy coming out of Rossini's Wednesday night. Timestamp in the corner. Below it, 3 lines of text that she read twice before they fully assembled in her mind. "Lucy Carter, employee, Marchetti Street Diner. Known associate, AR. Contact made Wednesday. Ongoing access confirmed. Documentation held in trust copy to be released upon failure to receive confirmation of agreed terms by Saturday midnight." She set the paper down. She smoothed it flat with her palm, even though it was already flat. "Released to who?" she said. "He didn't specify, which is the point. It's a threat, not a contract. It doesn't need to be specific to be effective." "What's in the documentation beyond this?" "I don't know yet." His eyes were on her. "I'm sorry, Lucy. This is what I didn't want for you." "I know." She looked at the photograph of herself. She looked ordinary in it, just a woman coming out of a restaurant, hands in her coat pockets, not looking at anything in particular. Just a woman who'd made a choice 5 days ago that she couldn't have known the shape of at the time. "Who's the woman outside?" "One of Dario's." He paused. "She's not here to do anything. She's here so you know he can put people outside your door." "It's a message." "Yes, he's good at messages. He's had 22 years to learn the language." Alexander leaned forward slightly. I have people looking at the documentation he mentioned. If it's manufactured, we can challenge it. If it's real meaning, if he's been compiling it longer than I thought, then we have a different problem. How different? The kind that involves lawyers of my own. He paused, and moving faster on the larger situation than I'd planned. Lucy looked at him. She thought about Saturday midnight. She thought about 46 hours. She thought about the woman standing outside in a dark coat, patient and deliberate there, as a reminder that someone was watching and someone was counting. I want to ask you something, and she said, and I want you to answer it the way you've been answering things, straight, no cushion. Ask. When you say you're going to move faster on the larger situation, what does that actually mean? Not euphemism. What does it mean? Alexander held her gaze. A long pause. It means I'm going to remove Dario from his position before Saturday. Formally, completely, with enough documentation of his own wrongdoing that any threat he's made becomes irrelevant because he no longer has the standing to carry it out. He paused. It's the version I can do that doesn't require anyone to get hurt. Is there a version that does? There's always a version that does. His voice was very quiet. I don't want to use it. But if the other version doesn't work in time, he didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything it needed to say, and Lucy heard all of it, and she sat with the weight of it without looking away. What can I do? She said. I told you, Bahattin. I'm not asking you to protect me from the answer, she said. What can I do? He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a deepening, the recalibration. There's one thing, he said slowly, but I want you to think about it before you say yes. Tell me. Dario has a second meeting, not with me, with a man named Vincent Cole. Cole runs a legitimate financial firm, but he's been the mechanism through which Dario has been moving the parallel money. The meeting is tonight. If Cole can be given a reason to pull back before that meeting. He paused. Cole is not in the life. He's a legitimate businessman who got greedy. If someone he doesn't know as connected to me approached him with the right information about Dario's instability, he would almost certainly withdraw. You want me to talk to him? I want you to consider it. You're not connected to me on paper. You're not someone he'd recognize as a threat. You could have a conversation with him that I can't. He looked at her steadily. But it puts you more visible, not less. And I won't ask you to do that. You're not asking me, I'm asking you. Lucy, I'm not fragile, she said. I've been not fragile my whole life. Tell me what you need Cole to hear. Alexander looked at the woman across from him. This waitress who'd had $4 in her wallet 5 days ago, who'd walked into Rossini's alone and laid down conditions with steady hands, who'd gone back on the floor and finished her shift while Dario Ferris's people watched from across the street, and she could see him deciding. Not whether to trust her. He'd already decided that. He was deciding whether it was fair. She could see the moment he determined that the decision wasn't his to make for her. Cole is having lunch at Emery's at noon, he said. Table by the east window. He always sits there, it's documented habit. He'll be alone for the first 20 minutes before his associate arrives. He paused. He needs to know that the man he's meeting tonight is under active investigation by people considerably above my pay grade. Federal Lucy. Dario's parallel structure crossed lines that attracted attention I didn't know about until this morning. Lucy went still. Federal. Yes. Something in Alexander's voice was very controlled. Which changes the shape of everything. Because if Dario has federal attention, then Cole is 2 degrees from a case that will take down anything in its radius. If he knows that before tonight's meeting, he walks away. And without Cole's mechanism, Dario's parallel structure collapses, which means his leverage collapses, which means Saturday midnight is meaningless. When did you find out about the federal investigation? This morning, after the meeting. His jaw tightened. My lawyer. Does Dario know? Not yet. He's been careful enough that he doesn't know he's been noticed yet, but he will know soon. A pause, which makes the next 24 hours critical. Lucy looked at the paper still flat on the table between them. Then she looked at Alexander. Emery's is 4 blocks from here. I know. I can be there by 11:50. Lucy, what do I tell him? Alexander looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket again and produced a second card, not like the first one this one had writing on the back. A name, a case number, a single line of text she didn't fully understand, but recognized as the kind of information that delivered in the right context to the right person would land like a fire alarm. "You say you're a concerned party," he said quietly. "You say you came across this information through professional contacts and felt he should know before making any commitments that couldn't be reversed. You give him that card, you give him 2 minutes, then you leave." He held the card out. "You don't mention my name. You don't explain how you know him. You don't answer any questions he asks about you. Just the card in 2 minutes. Just the card in 2 minutes." She took the card. She looked at it. She put it in her coat pocket next to the first one. "Okay. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She stood up, picked up the carafe, topped off his coffee with the automatic reflex of someone who has been doing this for years, and looked down at him. "Drink your coffee," she said. "You look like you haven't slept either." He looked up at her, that almost smile again, the rusty one. "I didn't." "Then drink the coffee." She straightened. "I'll text you when it's done." Emery's was the kind of place that did a good lunch business on the strength of its location and the quiet confidence of its booths. Lucy walked in at 11:48 and told the hostess she was meeting someone. She scanned the room and found the east window table, immediately a man in his mid-50s, silver-haired, expensive. Watch the particular posture of someone who had succeeded long enough that relaxation had started to look like authority. Vincent Cole. She recognized the type. She'd waited on that type for 12 years. She walked over. He looked up with the politely confused expression of a man who didn't recognize her but was too polished to be rude. "Can I help you, Mr. Cole?" she said. She didn't sit down. She kept her voice pleasant and professional, the voice she used with difficult customers when she needed them to hear her without feeling threatened. "I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch. I won't take more than 2 minutes." He frowned slightly. "Do I know you?" "No, but I've come across some information that I think you'd want to have before your meeting tonight." She reached into her coat pocket and placed the card on the table in front of him, face down first. Then she turned it over the way you present something you want someone to actually look at. "That case number is active. The timeline makes tonight's meeting a significant exposure risk." Cole looked at the card. She watched his eyes move across the text. She watched the color shift slightly in his face, not dramatically, just that barely there change that happens when something lands in the body before the mind has finished processing it. "Where did you get this?" he said quietly. "I told you I won't take more than 2 minutes. I've been here 90 seconds. She picked up her coat lapel slightly, a gesture her mother used to use, a closing gesture, a "I'm going now" signal. "I just felt you should know." She turned and walked out. She was half a block away when her hands started shaking. She put them in her pockets and kept walking and told herself it was cold. It was just cold. The shaking was just the temperature. She texted Alexander Dawn. He read it. His reply came in 20 seconds. "How did he react?" She typed. "He went pale. He's going to cancel." A pause, then, "Thank you." She looked at those 2 words for a moment. Then she typed back, "Don't thank me yet." She was almost at the diner when her phone rang. Not Alexander's number, not Ferris's number. A number she didn't recognize with a different area code, not local. She answered it. "Miss Carter?" The voice was measured, official, and completely unlike any voice she'd spoken to in the last 5 days. "My name is Agent Diane Marsh. I'm calling from the Federal Bureau of Investigation." A pause that had the quality of a door being gently but definitively opened. "I think it's time we had a conversation. About Alexander Russo, about Dario Ferris, and about the last 5 days of your life." Lucy stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. People moved around her. The city kept going. Above her, the sky was the flat gray of a late autumn morning with no particular interest in anyone's problems. "How did you get this number?" she said. "We've had it since Wednesday," Agent Marsh said simply. "Miss Carter, I want you to understand that you're not in trouble, but I need you to understand the full picture of what you're standing in the middle of." A pause. "Done. Can we meet this afternoon somewhere you feel safe?" Lucy stood on the sidewalk and felt the vertigo return, that specific clarifying vertigo of a world that keeps revealing itself to be larger than its last revealed layer. She thought about Alexander and Dario, and $46,000, and a $10 bill, and a man on cold steps who'd looked at her with eyes that already knew exactly what they were looking at, even if she hadn't known the same about him. She thought about Theo Carver. She thought about the favor is noted. She thought about the card she just placed on a table in front of a man she'd never met, and the case number on it, and where exactly that case number had come from, and whether Alexander had known it was federal when he handed it to her, or whether he'd known it longer than this morning. Everything since then is just consequence. She thought about that sentence one more time, about the specific, deliberate way he'd said it, about all the things a man who'd been managing a world this complicated for 22 years would know in advance that he would choose not to say. "Miss Carter," Agent Marsh said. Lucy started walking again. Her voice when it came out was steadier than she had any right to expect. "Tell me where," she said. She didn't call Alexander first. She knew she probably should have. She knew that by the rules of the arrangement they'd made over white tablecloths and diner coffee, the right move was to tell him immediately. Give him the name and the number and let him fold it into whatever he was managing. She didn't. She met Agent Marsh at a coffee shop on Delaney Street at 2 o'clock, and she sat down across from a woman in her early 40s with a direct gaze and a paper cup of tea, and she listened for 55 minutes. When Diane Marsh finished, Lucy sat very still for a long time. "You're sure about all of this?" she said. "We've been building it for 14 months. Marsh folded her hands on the table. "Alexander Russo is a primary subject. Dario Ferris is a secondary subject. The parallel structure Ferris built, we became aware of it 8 months ago. It's part of the same case." She paused. "What we didn't anticipate was your involvement. You're not in the file, Miss Carter, and we'd like to keep it that way." "Then what do you want from me?" "Nothing that compromises you." Marsh's voice was careful. "We're not asking you to inform. We're not asking you to wear a wire or participate in any active operation." She paused. "We're asking you to stop being inside this situation before the situation closes. Because when it closes," another pause, this one waited, "anyone in the radius gets examined, and you don't want to be examined." "When does it close?" "Soon, days, not weeks." Marsh looked at her directly. "The meeting you interrupted today, Cole canceling tonight, that accelerated Dario's timeline. He'll move faster now because he'll feel the walls. And Alexander." Marsh was quiet for a moment. "He's been aware of the federal investigation for longer than this morning," she said carefully. Lucy looked at her. "How much longer?" "We made contact with his legal team 6 weeks ago." Marsh held her gaze. "He's been cooperating with us selectively in exchange for certain considerations. He gave us the case number he gave you this morning." A pause. "We didn't ask him to involve you. That was his decision." The coffee shop moved around them. Ordinary sounds, ordinary people. No one paying any particular attention to 2 women at a corner table having a conversation that was quietly rearranging everything Lucy thought she understood. Alexander had known. He'd known when he sat in the diner at 7 o'clock. He'd known at Rossini's possibly. He'd known when he handed her that card and said, "You don't mention my name." He'd sent her into that lunch with information he knew was federal information that would move the case forward in ways that served his cooperation agreement, and he'd let her think it was just about Dario and Cole and Saturday midnight. She thought about his voice when he said, "I hear you, Lucy. That matters more than you know right now." She thought about what it matters and what it costs, and the difference between a man who uses you and a man who chooses you, and how, from certain angles, those two things can look identical. "Miss Carter," Marsh said, "are you all right?" Lucy looked up. She thought about how many times she'd been asked that in 5 days. She thought about how many times she'd said yes. "Not entirely," she said, "but I'm going to be." She stood up. She picked up her coat. She looked at Agent Marsh for a moment, at the steady professional face of a woman who was also, in her own way, just trying to hold things together in a world where the pieces kept moving. "I need to think," Lucy said. "I understand." Marsh slid a card across the table, a real one with a name and a number and a federal seal on it. "Take the time you need, but not too much." Lucy took the card. She put it in her coat pocket alongside the other 2. 3 cards in 5 days. She thought about the $10 she'd folded in that same pocket last Tuesday and pressed into the hand of a man she'd thought was a stranger. She walked out into the gray afternoon. She didn't call Alexander, not yet. She walked 3 blocks and stood at a corner and let the city move around her and thought about the specific weight of honesty, about how she'd believed in his, about the ways a person can be honest about some things and still arrange others very carefully around the edges of that honesty. She thought about what she was going to say to him. She thought about how it needed to be said, not in anger, not in the particular performance of betrayal that would give him something to respond to. Just straight the way she said things, the way she'd said things to him from the beginning when she didn't know who he was and couldn't have strategized if she tried. She thought about a man on cold steps saying, "You don't look like you have this to spare." She thought about saying back to him, "Not on those steps, not tonight, but soon the next time she sat across from him, neither do you." Because whatever he was managing and however much of it he'd managed around her rather than with her, she had seen him, really seen him. The wine he couldn't keep, still the admission that embarrassed him, the way he'd stood when she reached the table at Rossini's like a man who'd been taught that standing was the least you could do. The rusty smile, the genuine question at the end of every call, "Are you okay?" She had seen him, and the seeing wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't everything, and she needed him to understand the difference. She took her phone out. She typed, "We need to talk, not on the phone, tonight." His reply came in 11 seconds. "Tell me where." She typed, "The diner, after close. Pete has a key." A pause, "Then I'll be there." She put her phone away. She looked at the street in front of her. The ordinary, indifferent, relentless city going about its ordinary, indifferent, relentless business. She started walking. She had 3 hours. She had 3 cards in her pocket and a brother at home, and a shift that needed finishing, and a conversation tonight that was going to require everything she had, not the careful version, not the managed version, but the real one. The version that said, "I know what you did and I know why, and I need you to tell me the truth about all of it, because that is the only way any of this survives." She walked back to the diner. She put on her apron. She picked up the carafe, and she waited for the day to finish so the night could begin. The last customer left at 9:47. Lucy wiped down the counter and didn't rush it. She listened to Pete moving around in the kitchen, the scrape of the grill, the clatter of a pan being set to dry. The radio finally clicked off at 9:55, which meant he was done. He came out with his coat already on and looked at her the way he'd been looking at her all week. That careful, shuttered look that meant he knew more than he was saying and had decided for reasons of his own to keep saying less. "Carla already went," he said. "I know. You need me to stay and know." She rinsed the last cup, set it on the rack. "Go home, Pete." He stood there for a moment. He was 63 years old and had worked in this neighborhood his entire adult life and had seen things that had rearranged his understanding of the world enough times that he'd stopped being surprised by most of it. But he looked at Lucy now with something that was not his usual shuttered caution. It was something closer to worry, the real kind, the kind that doesn't know how to help but can't stop trying. "You're a good person," he said. Just that, flat and certain, and delivered without any apparent expectation of a response. Lucy looked at him. "Go home, Pete." He nodded once. He left. She heard the back door close. She heard the lock turn. She stood in the empty diner with the lights at half and the chairs still down, and the coffee machine doing its last quiet cycle, and she let herself have 30 seconds of absolute stillness. Then she heard the front door. Alexander came in the way he always did, quietly, with that particular economy of movement that she'd come to recognize as the physical expression of a man who'd spent decades making himself difficult to read. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, and he looked for the first time since she had known him tired. Not controlled tired, actually tired. The kind that lives behind the eyes. He looked at her face and stopped just inside the door. "You know," he said, not a question. He'd known she knew from the moment she'd texted, "We need to talk." She could see it, that he'd been carrying it across whatever the evening had held for him all the way to this moment. "Sit down," she said. He sat at the counter. She came around and stood on the other side of it, not hostile, not performing distance, just needing the counter between them for this first part. A small structure, something to hold the conversation in shape while she found the words. "Agent Marsh," she said. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Open them." "She contacted you." "This afternoon after call." Lucy looked at him steadily. 6 weeks ago, Alexander, you've been cooperating with a federal investigation for 6 weeks. Yes. And you handed me a card with a federal case number and sent me into a restaurant to deliver it to a man connected to that case. Yes. Without telling me it was federal. His jaw tightened. Yes. Why? He looked at the counter. He looked back at her. Because if I told you it was federal, you would have asked questions that I wasn't ready to answer yet. And I needed Cole to get that information before tonight's meeting. He paused. That was the calculation. I made it. And it was wrong. It was wrong because you used me without my full consent, Lucy said. Her voice was even. Not cold, she wasn't performing anything. She was just being precise the way you have to be precise when the stakes are high enough that imprecision costs you. You told me you'd be honest with me. That was the agreement. I know. You were honest about some things, and you arranged other things very carefully around the edges of that honesty. She paused. I need to know if there's more. Anything else you've arranged around the edges that I'm standing in the middle of without knowing it? He was quiet for a moment, a long one. She let it be long. She didn't fill it. The cooperation agreement, he said finally, is more extensive than selectively is probably accurate. He looked at her directly. I've been providing the federal investigation with information about Dario's parallel structure for 6 weeks. In exchange, certain aspects of my own operation are being treated with what my lawyer calls prosecutorial discretion, which means they're building a case around Dario, not me, and in exchange, I've been helping them build it. You're their source? Yes. You've been their source since before Tuesday night? Yes. So when Dario called me and said you'd removed his leverage, he thought he was countering a personal decision. He didn't know he was accelerating a federal case. Correct. Lucy absorbed this. She thought about the shape of the last 5 days, the way it had moved, the escalations, the calls the woman outside in the dark coat, the man in the gray jacket falling into step beside her. She thought about it all as a sequence that Alexander had been managing from a position of much more information than he'd shared with her, and she felt the particular anger of someone who has been trusted with part of the truth and kept from the rest of it by someone who thought they were protecting them. The thing is, she said, and her voice came out quieter now, I could have handled knowing. You knew I could handle things. You'd seen me handle things. She looked at him. So the choice to keep it from me wasn't about protecting me. It was about controlling what I'd do with the information. He was very still. Yes, he said. That's accurate. That's the part I need you to own. I own it. He put both hands flat on the counter, an open gesture she'd learned his version of showing his hands. I was wrong. I told you I'd be honest, and then I made a calculation, and the calculation overrode the honesty, and that is exactly what I said I wouldn't do. He paused. I don't have a justification that holds up. I have reasons that felt like justifications at the time and don't anymore. Lucy looked at him. She looked at his hands on the counter and his tired eyes in the absence for the first time of any layer of management between who he was and what he was showing her. And she thought about something Diane Marsh had said in that coffee shop on Delaney Street near the end, after the case and the cooperation agreement and all the architecture had been laid out. Marsh had said he asked about you. Before he agreed to anything, the first thing he asked was whether you could be kept out of it. She hadn't told him that. She'd been holding it, weighing it. Marsh told me you made keeping me out of it a condition, she said. Something moved across his face. Yes. That was before Tuesday night. You'd never met me. I'd never met you. He looked at her steadily. But when I sat down with my lawyer and they laid out the parameters of the cooperation agreement, the first thing I understood was that anyone I was in contact with could become incidental to the case, and I didn't want that for anyone who hadn't chosen it. He paused. Then I sat on those steps, and you showed up, and chose to walk into it anyway without knowing any of it. A long pause. I've been trying to reconcile that ever since. By managing it, Lucy said, by controlling how much I knew so you could control what happens. Yes. Which is the same thing Dario was doing with Ryan, just kinder. The word landed between them. She hadn't meant it as a blow, but she felt it land like one anyway, and she watched him absorb it without deflecting, without defending, without any of the sophisticated counter moves available to a man who had been navigating difficult conversations for 22 years. Yes, he said quietly. I understand why you'd see it that way. Is it wrong? A long silence. No, he said. It's not wrong. Lucy nodded slowly. She came around from behind the counter. She sat down on the stool next to him, not across from him, next to him, and she folded her hands in her lap and looked at the middle distance for a moment. I'm not walking away, she said. He turned to look at her. I want to be clear about why, she continued. Not because of Ryan's debt. That's done, that's separate. Not because I'm afraid of what happens if I do. Marsh made it clear I can walk away clean. She paused. I'm not walking away because I made a choice 5 days ago on a street corner, and I made it with my whole self, and I don't take those back. She looked at him. But I need something from you that is non-negotiable. Tell me. No more calculations that involve me without telling me you're making them. No more arranging things around the edges of honesty. If you're going to trust me, actually trust me, not the managed version of trusting me, then you give me the full picture. Every time. She held his gaze. Even when you think I can't handle it. Especially then. He looked at her for a long time. Agreed, he said. And then, I need you to know that the instinct to protect you, even the version that overstepped it, wasn't strategic. It wasn't about the case or what you could do for me. He paused. That part was just, he stopped. Human, she said. Yes. He seemed slightly surprised by how directly that landed. Yes, just human. She nodded. I know, she said. That's why I'm still sitting here. His phone rang at 10:22. He looked at the screen and something in his face shifted immediately, a sharpening, a coming to attention that she'd never seen happen that fast before. He picked up. She watched his face while he listened. She had learned in 5 days to read his silences as much as his words. This one was controlled in a new way, harder, more compressed. When, he said. Then, how many? Then after a long pause, don't move until I say. He ended the call. He set the phone down on the counter. He was very still for a moment. Dario moved tonight, he said. Lucy's stomach dropped. What happened? Cole canceled the meeting this afternoon. Dario found out why within a couple of hours. Alexander's voice was completely even. He went to one of my primary accounts tonight. Tried to liquidate a significant position using authorization codes he should no longer have had. Should no longer? I had them changed at 5 o'clock. My lawyer confirmed the change at 5:45. He paused. Dario tried to use them at 9:30. The attempt was flagged, blocked, and immediately reported to my team and by automated protocol to the federal case. Lucy understood. So he just handed them a live action. On record, time-stamped, initiated from his personal device from his home address. Alexander's voice was quiet and absolute. He panicked when Cole pulled out, and he moved, and in moving, he handed Marsh's team everything they needed to make the case tonight instead of next week. It's over, Lucy said slowly. The case, Dario. Marsh will move within the hour. He picked up his phone again. I need to make some calls. My lawyer, my own people. He stopped. He looked at her. I need you to know something first. What? When this breaks publicly, and it will break probably by morning, your name is not in any of it. Marsh confirmed that as of this afternoon. You are not in the file. You are not a subject. You are not a witness. He looked at her steadily. Whatever comes next, you walk into it clean. Lucy looked at him. She thought about what clean meant. She thought about Tuesday night and $10 in 12 minutes in a choice made on a sidewalk in the cold. She thought about all the things that had happened since and how none of them had made her into someone different, just someone more fully themselves, corners that had been theoretical, now tested and confirmed. Make your calls, she said. I'll make coffee. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood up, moved to the other end of the counter, and started talking. Lucy made coffee. It was 11:40 when his calls were done. He came back to the counter and she slid a cup toward him, and they sat there in the quiet of the closed diner with the low lights and the clean counters, and the city doing what it always did outside, indifferent and enormous. Marsh is moving, he said. Dario will be in custody by midnight. And you, if I so, the cooperation and agreement stands. My lawyer will be in contact with her team by morning. He paused. There will be a process. Months of it, probably. It won't be simple. But it'll be honest. He looked at her. Yes, it'll be honest. She wrapped both hands around her cup. What happens to Theo Carver? He was quiet for a moment. I've been in contact with his family. There's a process there too. I can't undo what happened, but I can and will make sure the circumstances are understood by the right people. He paused. That was the second condition I added to the cooperation agreement. After you. Lucy looked at him. She felt something settle in her chest, not resolution, not the clean closing of a door. Something more like a foundation. Like the specific unglamorous feeling of something solid under your feet after a long time of uncertain ground. You added me to a federal cooperation agreement, she said. The condition of your protection? Yes. Before you ever spoke to me. Before I ever spoke to you. She thought about that for a moment. About a man who had made a terrible decision and then sat down on cold steps to breathe for 10 minutes and had been found in that small human interval by a woman giving away her last $10. About the collision of those two things, his exhaustion and her stubborn, uncalculated kindness, and how neither of them had planned it and how it had mattered anyway. How it had mattered more than most planned things. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. That night on the steps, if I hadn't stopped, if I'd kept walking. He looked at her. He thought about it honestly the way she'd come to expect. I don't know, he said. The case would have continued. Dario would have moved eventually either way. The outcome might have been similar. He paused. But I would have gone home that night with the decision I'd made and no reason to question it. And I think he stopped. What? I think I would have kept making decisions like that, he said quietly. The kind I can't live with. Because no one was asking me to try to live differently. The diner was very quiet. That's a lot to put on $10, Lucy said. It's not the $10, he said. It was never the $10. She knew that. She'd known it since Rossini's. She just needed to hear him say it plainly without the elegant framing, without the careful architecture of a man who had learned to say difficult things in ways that protected him from their full weight. He had just said it plainly. She nodded once. She picked up her cup. Outside in the distance, she heard sirens. Not an unusual sound in this city at this hour, but she heard them with a new awareness, knowing what they were moving toward, knowing the shape of the thing they were closing in on, knowing that by morning the name Dario Ferris would be attached to a federal arrest and a set of charges that would move through the system for the next several years, and that Ryan would wake up to a world where none of those facts had anything to do with him. She thought about Ryan. She thought about him sleeping right now in their apartment and how he had no idea that the thing he'd been afraid of for 8 weeks had already been dismantled at its root, that the structure built to use him and trap him and reach through him to someone else had been taken apart in the space of 5 days by forces that had never been about him at all. She would tell him tomorrow. Not everything, not Alexander, not the full shape of it, but enough. Enough so he could put it down. I should go, she said. Alexander stood when she did. That same reflex from Rossini's, the automatic courtesy of it, the way it seemed to come from something that had been there before all the rest of him was built. Lucy. He said her name the way he'd started saying it, direct without decoration. I know I'm asking you to exist in something complicated. I know the version of honesty I owe you going forward is harder than what I gave you this week. He paused. I also know you didn't ask for any of this. No, she said. I asked for nothing. I just stopped on a sidewalk. She looked at him. But I'm not sorry I did. He looked at her for a long moment. Neither am I, he said. That's the truest thing I've said in 22 years. She picked up her coat. She put it on. She checked the counter was clear, checked the coffee machine was off. Did all the small automatic things of a woman who had been closing this diner for 3 years and would be back to open it in the morning. At the door, she stopped. She turned back. For the record, she said, I'm not a variable. I'm not an asset. I'm not leverage. And I'm not a liability. And I'm not a condition on a cooperation agreement. She held his gaze across the empty diner. I'm Lucy Carter. And the next time you make a decision that involves me, you make it with me, not around me, not for me. She paused. With me. Alexander Russo looked at her, this woman with $4 and a 12-minute walk home, who had crouched down on a cold sidewalk and given away everything she had without hesitation or calculation or any interest at all in what she might get back, and he nodded, slowly, with his whole self. "With you," he said. She pushed open the door. The city was cold and wide and lit up in all its indifferent brilliance, and the sirens had faded now, carrying their freight toward wherever things like this ended up. The sidewalk under her feet was the same one it had always been. The cracks were where she'd left them. Lucy Carter pulled her coat closed, put her hands in her pockets, and walked home. Not away from something, not towards something that frightened her, not in flight and not in surrender, and not in the particular resigned forward motion of a woman who'd been holding things together so long she'd forgotten she had a choice. Just home. 12 minutes, her feet knowing every step. She had given away her last $10 on a Tuesday night, and she had meant it when she said it, and everything that followed had been consequence frightening and complicated and sometimes dishonest and completely irrevocably alive. And she had met all of it as herself, and she was still herself. And that, in the end, was the only thing that had never been in question. She walked through the cold, and she did not look back because she didn't need to. The city moved around her, and the night was deep, and somewhere behind her, a dangerous man was sitting alone in a closed diner, learning what it cost to be met with honesty and learning it was worth it. Lucy Carter went home, and she had never been more certain of who she was than in the moment she walked through her own front door, locked it behind her, and stood in the quiet of her ordinary life, unchanged, unbroken, and completely finally hers.